All right, part 2 of episode 39 of 84 Feet with Cady and Cap. We are here with our usual recap of the action with Jeff Mlinar from Empire State Takeover. Sir Jeff of the Takeover, how are you?
I am wonderful. Another morning, another week. We're now into that, I don't know. It's not the dog days yet, but this is like the part of the season that leads into the dog days of winter. We made it through that December stretch where it's a lot of non-league games, some league stuff, but a lot of non-league stuff, a lot of showcase events, even off the holiday break. But then then you get the very showcase tournament heavy holiday week. And now, for the next 6 weeks outside of Martin Luther King weekend, it's a lot of just, your Tuesday night, Thursday night, your single league game sort of stuff. So getting that time of year where we kind of really see who's about it. The excitement's always there in the first month for everybody, and then sometimes you have to find your own energy coming up in these next couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean the next 4 to 5 weeks are going to be providing some separation to let us figure out who we believe the contenders are and who maybe have another year or two to develop. So, it's we're definitely down to that time of year at this point. But gonna look at your travels from it's a little bit abbreviated because we recorded last week. I think it was on a Wednesday or a Thursday. So things are a little bit abbreviated as far as recapping things this time around as we're recording this on Tuesday, January 7th. But 3 games of Section 2, Section 2 involvement you were at recently. Shaker hosting Albany Academy on Friday night. The Academy Holy Names game that was at Siena College back on Sunday. And then last night, Tamarack at Hoosick Valley. And
Hartford.
And Hartford it's hosting Scroon Lake before that. So a little doubleheader action for you going up to the Adirondack League and then back down through the Wasserin. So I want to touch on the Academy games real quick for a second because this is something that a few people agree with me on, including Cap. Shaker, and you can obviously relate to this because you were at the game I'm going to reference here too. The Shaker game almost felt like, for Academy, it felt like the Columbia game 2.0, where now obviously the slight difference being Columbia was 20 to 29 from the free throw line and Shaker was not, but the general theme of being competitive for 3 quarters and then let it slip away in the fourth, it just felt like that all over again. But then the Holy Names game Sunday, Academy comes out, play a very tight first half, go in the locker room with a 1 possession lead, and then Alex Leonard decides to take the game into her hands in the third quarter and blow the game open for Academy. So, just your general thoughts about those 2 games for Academy and what you think of all the squads going forward.
So the Shaker Academy game was one of the, and I don't mean for this to sound negative. I don't mean for it to come off negative. So I'm kind of being a little careful-ish with my words. Shaker Academy game, my take was that neither team played poorly, but neither team played particularly well by their standards. I think both teams would look at the majority of that game feeling like there was a lot that they left on the board. Like Academy's probably thinking about they had opportunities to create some separation, well, at both sides really, because they both had leads at various points. They probably look at the first 3 quarters or so and say, there were opportunities to be had that the game wasn't hanging in the balance in the last handful of minutes. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have my notes in front of me right now from that game, but when you see me with my little steno pad just tucked in my arm, the left side of each piece of paper that I'm using for a game is scoring notes, and then the right side is the notes that actually matter, with just game notes, player notes, whatever. And again, paraphrasing, but early in the fourth quarter, I wrote something to the effect of nobody's separated themselves in this game, period. Not a team standpoint, not a player standpoint. Nobody's differentiated themselves from the pack. Who's going to make the plays? And, the door was open for either team. And Shaker put together, you coaches talk about putting sequences together. Get a score, get a stop, or or vice versa. Get a stop, get a score. Positive sequences. And there was a game that was in the balance. I want to say Academy had a 3-point lead when this started, but Shaker went on a sequence of 4 consecutive stops and scores. Got a stop, got a score. I think it was Peyton Hoblock in transition. Got a stop, got a score. Don't remember if it was a bucket or free throws. Got a stop, got to the free throw line, split a pair. Got to stop. Down 2. If Academy gets a stop there, it's still, 1 possession game, minute 45 left or something like that, 2 minutes left. And there weren't a tremendous amount of defensive breakdowns, but it was a bad time for a defensive breakdown to happen. Jayla Jeter got lost in the corner, made him pay, big 3. Now it's a 5-point game and you feel like Academy's reeling. But the fourth quarter, from a team standpoint, it wasn't necessarily any particular player, but the game was hanging in the balance for just like someone take it. It was hanging in the balance for whoever was able to make those plays. And Shaker 4 straight stops and scores. Actually, it was 6 out of 7. There were a sequence of stop score for Shaker 6 out of 7 times, where they scored on 7 straight possessions, whether it was field goal or at the free throw line. And the only thing that they gave up in that process was a Morgan VN 3. So that was my thought about that game. It was, both teams kind of left, and it was the first game of 2025, and it was a nice crowd. It was, home court for Shaker, but there were a lot of neutral people there. It wasn't just like your family and friends discount sort of thing. There were a lot of the local general basketball public there, more TV cameras than anything I've been at this year. I had a parent come up to me after the game and say they listened. That's what was being referred to, as to what Coach Shipley had posted on social media, what we discussed on the podcast last week. But yeah, it was a little bit more of like a buzz sort of crowd, and it was that sort of environment, just waiting for someone to take it. Shaker took it in the final minutes of that game. Fast forward to Sunday with Academy Holy Names. Something else that we discussed on the podcast last week, I think I had said something to the effect of Academy has to make sure to not beat themselves, but they're almost competing against themselves in a way, as far as no letdown. And I don't think there was a letdown in the first half, but I do think that they found a different gear in the second half than what they had in the first. Holy Names played well in the first 16 minutes, and I think what a big stretch was, yes, Alex Leonard kind of took the game over in the third quarter with 15, a personal 15-0 run to start the third, turn a 1-point game into a 16-point game. Some of it was transition. Some of it was just attack off the bounce, make something happen. It was the eye-catching stretch of the game. What I look at equally as big in that game was the last, say, 45 seconds of the first half. Because by that point, Holy Names is just playing well. Their guards are holding up. Their guards are producing. They have positional balance as far as Maggie Vollmer's scoring, but their guards are also scoring. Lizzie Blanche is scoring. Gianna Savoke is hitting shots. They turned the ball over, but they didn't turn the ball over a ton. They kind of held it down enough. Their half-court defense was strong. The Academy was having just some issues getting in some sort of a rhythm. Academy ended up scoring 31 points in the first half, but in a sense, it was almost a little bit misleading because I felt like they had troubles in the half court. It was how efficient they were scoring off of turnovers and scoring in transition. But Holy Names had the lead before the last 40 seconds of that half of the first half, where it was whatever, steal, score, stop, score before the buzzer. And you feel like all of these things went well for Holy Names. They played well. Academy was having their issues. Academy was getting a little bit of foul trouble, not like deep personal foul trouble as much as it was they got in the penalty pretty early, changed how they had to defend. They were getting tagged for those like step late hand checks, so on and so forth. And Holy Names getting to the free throw line. There was more freedom of movement, all that stuff. And all these boxes are checked in Holy Name's favor. And I look up at the scoreboard at halftime, and Academy leads by 1. And that's when it hit me where this doesn't look too well. This doesn't look too good for Holy Names. Just if they're able to manage the clock, get a score over those last 2 or 3 possessions of the half, and they go into the locker room up 4, then I'm not saying that we have a fully different game, but to me, there's a little bit different feel. Whereas Holy Names plays very well in that first half, and all those boxes that I feel like they need to have checked in order to be in that game, potentially win that game. A lot of those boxes are checked, and they're still down 1 at half. So I think that stretch to end the first half was just as big as anything that happened. But, again, credit to Academy. That's also, you go in the locker room, you're up 1, but at the same time, like, something's got to change. And those step late, where I said that I felt like they found another gear in the second half, those step late fouls that they were accruing in the second quarter didn't happen in the second half. Rotation was more crisp. They weren't ever a half step late on backline rotation in the posts, where Holy Names is understandably going to try to get the ball to Maggie Vollmer as much as they can. Everything was there. It was aggressive. It was on time. And, they took that first 16 minutes and responded well in the final 16. And I think it's also good for Holy Names too, because this is the first time this year they kind of got punched in the mouth. So and for them, it was, and I heard, I was on the Holy Names side, the baseline I was on the Holy Names side. So I heard some of, the huddle talk a little bit, and made sense to me in the sense of like, how Academy had to respond to that first half. Now Holy Names has to respond to getting punched in the mouth. Where that turned it, you were there, wonderfully announcing the game, professionally announcing the game, and you say turn into an avalanche.
Now get a look at the pair of games you visited last night. Hartford were able to be victorious against Scroon Lake, a non-league matchup, not even a Section 2 matchup for Hartford. Scroon Lake is out of Section 7. Hartford was able to hold serve and win that game. And then you took a little trip south to some Western League action, seeing Tamarack and Hoosick Valley. Tamarack, a little bit of a scare there in the third quarter, but they were eventually able to hold serve and get the road victory at Hoosick Valley. Any particular takeaways you had from either of those games last night?
Nothing major. I go to Hartford Scroon Lake because, as we've discussed, I'm now doing the ranking. I'm doing my own rankings, the Upstate 20, on the website, EmpireStateTakeover.com. And those sorts of games are good for me to go and see, where I've had Hartford on the Upstate 20 in Class D, somewhere in that 10. I don't remember the exact number I have them at, but it's somewhere in that like 12 to 15 sort of range, 10 to 15 sort of range. And those are good from the rankings perspective. Those are good for me to go see those, like competitive Section 2. We've talked about them, kind of being in that. We've got Northville, and then we've got them in Spa Catholic. So it's them against a Scroon Lake team that Section 7, personally, the way I look at it, is probably Bolton, who used to be a Section 2 member back in the day when I started doing this. It's about as far south in Section 7 as you can go. But I kind of look at Bolton as the top Class D team in 7, and then there's a group. I look at it as behind them. As far as like Scroon Lake and Boquet Valley and Seton Catholic. So those, from a rankings perspective, those are good barometers for me to be able to get that 2 versus 7. I had seen Bolton already last month. Now I get to see Scroon Lake. I get to have that comparison in my head. I get to have a little more of like a 2 versus 7 comparison in my head. So they're good for that. There's always player watch too. That's kind of what the root of EST is, the evaluation perspective, or the evaluation of players. So I'm always, that's always in mind every game that I go to, every time that I watch any team. So it's another opportunity, kind of like a quarterly or a semi-annual or whatever, check in on Mackenzie Johnson from Hartford, see how she's coming along, see how she's progressing. Thought she did a nice job of, she scored. They had 3 in double digits. I think she finished with 15, but I thought she did a nice job, better than what I've seen in the past, of fueling their transition efforts, getting others involved, where Hartford likes to play fast. They press. They want to run. They run off misses. They run off makes. Their biggest kid is, or their tallest kid is like 5'6", so they kind of have to. And I thought she did a nice job. There were several times where she hit teammates with good hit-ahead passes in transition to create layups, scoring opportunities, that more so than what I'd seen in the past. So that was all good stuff. But yeah, so that was kind of twofold as far as going to watch that game. And then I had not watched Tamarack yet this season. So I was due for a check-in on them. Hartford game was 5:00. Tamarack was playing at Hoosick Valley, and the tip time in Scotticoke was scheduled to be 7:30. ended up being close to 8. It was a late start. JV went pretty long. So that was a good opportunity to get a check-in on Caleb Bedoin and the Tamarack team. And yeah, as you said, it was scare. Yeah, I mean, it was a point from that game would probably be, and I haven't really brought this one up on social media as much as I have in the past. I feel like this is one that I used to beat home constantly. I tend to think of the first 4 minutes of the second half as a key stretch in a lot of games. Maybe not every game, but there's a lot of games where I look at the first 4 minutes of the second half as a very key stretch in the game as far as, is this going to go, is this going to go to the wire, or is is team A going to end this now, or is team B going to take this to the wire? And Tamarack led by 14 at half. And it was one of those, like, if Tamarack starts the second half strong, then this turns into a bench game in the fourth quarter. If Hoosick Valley starts this second half strong, then we got one to the finish. And it was very much Hoosick Valley. It turned into a game that Tamarack kind of turned off the Jets and they had to turn it back on. Not scoring for the first about 6 minutes of the third quarter. Hoosick Valley went on an 11-0 run, cut it to 3. And the door opened for Tamarack to regroup and, they had an opportunity. I thought they probably needed to. Hoosick Valley had issues with the pressure early on. I thought it was at a point where they probably needed to dial up the pressure again. And the door kind of opened for them to regroup, talk about it, and dial it up on a dead ball. And they got a Kayla stealing layup and was off to the races from there. Other things on top of the 4 minutes of the second half. I know I'm rambling about Tamarack Hoosick Valley now, but road points, two things that I'll kind of go back and forth beating on. Defense travels and stars on the road. I tend to think that supporting cast is going to get the job. Complimentary players, they can get the job done for you at home and push you over the top. Your dogs got to be dogs on the road. And defense traveled when it needed to. They held Hoosick Valley without a bucket for the last nearly 12 minutes of the game. It was 26-23, and final was 44-26, with Hoosick Valley having 3 free throws over the last 11 minutes and change. And it was, particularly when needed, because Caleb Bedoin is an unselfish player by trade. She has the skill to be a 20-25 point scorer night in and night out. She's got the mindset to get everybody in, quote, make the right play, get everybody involved, draw eyes, make the kick, and be more like a 15-point, 6-7 assist type. When she had to be aggressive, she was aggressive. Your dogs got to be dogs on the road, and she got into her stuff. She couple step back threes early in the game to set the tone, give them a little bit of a lead. And then when Hoosick Valley got close, it was Kayla stealing layup. Kayla scores the first 7 points of the fourth quarter, attacking the rim, pulling up, shooting the 3. So, all of those points kind of converged in that game.
And we're going to have Cap and I will have Jason Johnson, the head coach of Hartford, and his daughter Mackenzie on the show next week. So look forward to that conversation. Always been a fan of Jason as a coach, and like you've been watching Mackenzie, over the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to have that conversation. And one thing Hartford's going through, as long as the schedule I'm seeing on Max Preps is correct, they're in the midst of a 13-game January right now.
Mm-hmm.
They are so far they're 2-1. They lost to Cambridge to start the month. Then they've taken care of Argyle and Scroon Lake. Tonight they have Warrensburg. Then they play Friday and Saturday. Friday against Salem, Saturday at Crown Point, and then they have a normal week next week with games Tuesday, Friday, before having a Monday, Tuesday, Friday stretch, the 20th through the 24th. So, really backloaded schedule for Hartford. So, be interesting to see how they are able to handle such a heavy month before they get what looks like would be roughly 2 weeks off, maybe 2.5, before they even have to play a sectional game from the end of their schedule, because their last game will be February 4th, it looks like. So,
Yeah, they'll probably. I imagine they might have one that's not scheduled in between that because Adirondack League does playoffs. So,
or God forbid, there's a snow game where they have to make up down the road, and they'll have that little bit of room there before sectional seating comes out for makeup. So
Washington County, I imagine they'll have one of those.
Just throwing that out there. It's like being out in the Finger Lakes area. You just never know at that point. All right, moving on to just a general look at Class C real quick. Maple Hill, they were able to beat Chatham, and right now the look at Class C. Burnox Westerlo, they did lose at Chalmont last night. But again, we're talking about a Class C team going and playing at a Class A team. So, I mean, you're not gonna you're interested in the performance and the competition level from BKW, but at the same time, you're not going to put too much stock in the L itself against a team like Chalmont. But yeah, BKW up there, obviously. Lake George is doing their thing in Adirondack. Maple Hill, Stillwater, and then obviously, Greenwich at the top right now, being considered, I believe they're like top 2 or something like that in the state or something like that. Number 2 in the state behind Frewsburg out of Section 6. All in all,
I also have them at 2 behind Frewsburg.
Yeah, all in all, as we look at Class C, obviously Greenwich is Greenwich from every point that we've looked at before this season, but the look at the rest of Class C, I mean, it's still very much. It's still very much, everyone trying to make their own case, and things are still pretty open back there with all the teams I just named, and even OESJ is still unbeaten. So, going to be interesting to see how that all pans out.
Yeah, I think C in recent weeks, we have now seen Greenwich start to be more of what I envisioned they could be, with just kind of putting the pieces in place, getting everything in order. Bailey and Jordan Wolf getting their sea legs under them. So I do think that they've separated themselves a bit. Stillwater's continuing to go about its business. I think they've got it's either next week or the week after. They got a pretty interesting stretch coming up. Not in the immediate future, but not all that far out. Maple Hill, I might get a chance I might see them twice this week. I haven't fully put my schedule together. I've got pretty much all my nights this week. I have down to 2 options, and I just haven't decided on basically any of them as far as where I'm going each night, but I think I have them as potentially on the schedule for both Thursday and Sunday.
This is next week you're talking about?
That's this week, Maple Hill.
Well, Maple Hill is at Taconic Hills Friday. We double check Thursday real quick.
I'm looking. They had some weird stuff on the schedule. I'm also using this as an opportunity to double check myself, because they had a weird one.
Oh, they have Schenectady. Yeah, they host Schenectady Thursday, and then they're at Taconic Hills Friday. and then they're at Voorheesville Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's what. So that. Oh.
Four
So
games. Well, 5 games in
yeah.
8 days.
So the Thursday one is actually they're playing Schenectady. That one's actually played at Holy Names.
Oh, okay.
It's gonna be an early start. I think a 5 o'clock start. That's why I'm a little bit interested in it.
Yep.
That game is at Holy Names, and I believe Holy Names plays Albany High right after. So I'm looking at that as an opportunity to get 2 in of Maple Hill, Schenectady at Holy Names at 5 o'clock, and then Albany at Holy Names at 6:30. And then I saw recently I'm subscribed to everybody's Schedule Galaxy notifications that Maple Hill Voorheesville popped up recently at 11 a.m. on a Sunday. So I imagine that if those are correct, I think I'm definitely going to get a look at Maple Hill on Sunday. Probably Thursday as well, but that's less of a guarantee. But yeah, they've been, we discussed this weeks back, but they had a little bit later start to their season than than most around them, in not having any games until around that December 10th, 12th range. So they're still, they're kind of hitting that. I wouldn't even really call this mid-season for them just yet. I know they had a pretty nice home win in the championship of their tournament last week over Tamarack. I've heard good things about how Addie Lazinski's played so far this year. I feel like I have an idea of what to expect out of her. I've heard good things from people that have watched them, so I'll have an opportunity to get to watch them in person later this week. And OESJ's got a fun one tomorrow at Northville. That was what I woke up to this morning. A 7 a.m. text about what I thought about the OESJ Northville game. So they get there. I think I want to say OESJ's got 1 loss then out of area when they played in the West Canada tournament.
Oh, right.
But they've done what they need, because the game that they had against Bern they were supposed to have last month against Bern got rescheduled. So they've taken care of business as far as who's been in front of them in the WAC, and easily their biggest test of the year so far, making the trip to Northville on Wednesday. But should be interesting, if they can handle the pressure of Haley Monroe and the ball pressure Haley Monroe and Northville's guards, then maybe we got something here. If they can't, they're in trouble. But that's also everybody against Northville.
So just a heads up, for your own sake, try reaching out to Coach Giglio or maybe Coach Oliver himself at Maple Hill, because for whatever reason it's listed the Maple Hill game being played at Maple Hill Thursday instead of Holy Names, which is I don't know.
I just looked at it. So on the Schedule Galaxy where it says it's at the Maple Hill, but then you can attach notes to it.
Oh, okay.
And there's a note attached to it that says the game will be played at Academy of Holy Names.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So don't know why. That's one that we're not sure what it is, but hey, how about we all do that? And I can watch 2 games a night every night.
Right. That would just make things way too easy for you, though.
Yes, it would.
All right. Looking at Class B, the classification that we enter the season assuming would really baffle our brains until the very end, honestly. But Cooksaki Athens with Regan Helen and Bailey Brisky, they keep putting in the work. Catskill, they squeak out a 3-point win over Waterville lead, but they keep on chugging along. Mechanicville, obviously in the midst of things. Greenville, Tamarack, we've already discussed. And I'm not just saying this because we had Kate Galuli on last night with me and Cap, but I think LaSalle, and I think it's going to be partially based on how their seeding goes. I think LaSalle, you're going to look at the end of the year and their record's probably going to be around the 500 mark, but don't let that record deceive you. I feel like they could upset the card a little bit come sectional time themselves. What are your general thoughts as of right now with Class B as it stands?
I do think seeding is going to come into play next month a lot because, and I think that seeding comes into play more in Class B on an annual basis in Section 2 than anywhere else or than any other class. So Section 2 listeners, you already get this. Non-Section 2 listeners, because I know that we get some on a week-by-week basis, the way Section 2 seeds is a little different than everybody else. And I always say that I prefer the way Section 2 seeds compared to everyone else with I think that seeding just based off of overall record is archaic in nature. But Section 2 a little bit closer to there's guidelines behind certain things as far as seeding teams in order of how they finished within their league and all that, but it's a little bit closer to what you would envision in like NCAA tournament style sort of seeding, where things like strength of schedule come into play. You can be, like those Averill Park teams of the mid-late 2010s, where they weren't the top of the Suburban. They were kind of middle of the pack Suburban. They finish 11-9, and they're still the 1 seed in Class A because their strength of schedule is regarded so much more highly than non-Suburban A's. So we have a little different way of seeding than pretty much anywhere else in the state of New York. Where it gets screwy, for lack of a better term, is in Class B, because you have representation in Class B from so many different leagues. You've got, just the names that you brought up are Wazarin League, Colonial Council, Patroon, Corinth is going to be in the mix in Class B. They're an Adirondack League. Fonda won't be a thing this year, but Fonda has been Fonda's been notorious in the last several years for being a bracket buster in Class B.
But you'll still have a couple of WAC teams
when they're in the WAC, and now you've got a couple with Cobleskill, Johnstown going to the WAC. Then you've got Class B representation in the WAC as well. So you have several different leagues that have Class B schools, and there's some non-league intermingling, but there's not a ton. So that's the one that can be a little, Class B can be the one in Section 2 that's a little bit more like open for a bad seed or open for an upset. So yeah, it depends on, I think a lot will depend on seeding, if how much more highly how do they value the Wazarin? How do the league reps value the Wazarin in comparison to the Patroon? With LaSalle being in the league with Holy Names and Academy and Catholic High, and probably having to play Shalmon at some point too, how is their record valued compared to, how is their, we'll just say they finish out and they played Guilderland non-league and they played Niski non-league. So let's say they finish out the year 9-11. I'll just use that as an example, or 8-12. Say you finish year 8-12. How does their 8-12 compared to, name whatever, somebody's 14-6. So there's a lot of questions to be had. That'll be the toughest class to seed, and how the matchups break down in several weeks, I think that'll go a long way. But it's still very open. Kisaki has ripped through the competition, but they also haven't had a lot of competition. And I'm saying that coming from, I was before the season started, our first podcast, where I'm, kind of championing Kisaki along with Mechanicville. Is like, this is a team that you're going to want to know about, and they certainly are. But they've been ripping through everybody, but they haven't really seen. They beat Maple Hill. That was a high level win for them. Besides that, they haven't really seen a whole lot. Mechanicville's finding ways to win. It hasn't necessarily come easy for them. They were down double digits at Tamarack to start the game. Had to claw back to win that game by 1. They beat LaSalle over the break. They were down at half. Had to claw back and go plus 15 after the break to win that. So, yeah, there's still that level of openness, and there's a lot of moving parts with competitive teams in several leagues where it's still I think, although we have maybe a handful that you brought up that are just separating themselves a little bit among their pack. It's things get a little bit hairy as far as what if one of those 5 that we feel like is separating themselves a little bit gets seeded as an 8, and you have a 1-8 quarter that very easily could have been a semifinal, or so much left to be determined there. That'll be the most interesting class in Section 2 to me, as far as just it depends on matchups, and it depends on this is cliche, and I think it's overused, and what is it, the how and the why and the what behind it, like what do you mean when you say that? But it kind of depends on who shows up on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and the Coxsackie Athens schedule, like you mentioned, I feel like their first real pushback they're going to get is going to be a 3-game stretch coming up that starts next Friday, the 17th, when they host Greenville. Then the 21st, they'll host Cobleskill Richmondville, who's, been respectable out of the WAC so far this year. And then a Saturday at 9 a.m. game on the 25th.
Oh, yeah.
Playing at Columbia Green Community College against Catskill. So I feel like that'll be a 3-game stretch that'll really help shape the story around this Coxsackie Athens team, because even though Greenville's got a first-year head coach in Bobby Shields, they have a ton of returning parts, young returning parts that are very skilled, and are they've been very respectable so far this year. They're sitting at around 7-2, I think, right now. And then obviously Catskill, like we've mentioned before, it's not always the prettiest, but Catskill, they're winning the games put in front of them so far. So,
it's just the reality. I won't dance around it. It's tough in the Patroon. Like, it's tough to get good games. There's a lot of games in the Patroon when you're pretty good. Catskill went through it with Janae. Hudson went through it a handful of years ago and they were pretty good. Kasaki's going through it right now. Yeah, it's tough to you got a lot of sleepers.
Yeah.
It's just it is what it is. So yeah, so that means you have to be adventurous with your non-league schedule if you want to try to get the most out of it. Be adventurous with the level of competition that you see, and hopefully different kinds of looks that you get. And those are a lot of like competing against yourself sort of games, and that's why there's certain instances like Kasaki played Germantown a few days ago. I think we know how it went. Put up 110. I know one of the officials on the game. He said it could have been way worse.
Yeah, because Regan Helen and Bailey Brisky didn't play the fourth quarter at all.
He said it could have been way worse. He said they were nice. They called off the dogs early. They stopped pressing early. They got great minutes for everybody on that roster. So that could have been like just to kind of show what the difference is from one end to the other in that league. Like that final score was they put up 110, and he, his words were basically they put up 110. They probably could have won by 110.
Yeah, and Cam Slater didn't play that fourth quarter either. Slater had 23, Regan and Helen had 21, and Bailey Brisky had 35. And all three of those players did that in 3 quarters. So that speaks to exactly what that official was talking about.
Right, and those are kind of difficult games when you're good, or when you're a higher level team. Those are kind of difficult games to play because if you play more lackadaisical and more to the speed of what's around you for the better part of a month, and then you get a stretch of, you get your Greenville, you get your Catskill, you get Maple. They got Maple Hill coming up a week after at Maple Hill, a few days after that Catskill game. You kind of go into that run. Those are tough if you just went through a month where you kind of sleepwalk your way through it. It's very difficult to get right for those games. So like you have to play if you can have your starters not play 32, you could have them sit the fourth quarter, sit the back end of the third quarter, make it kind of a bench game and as the second half progresses. But when they're in, you got to do what you do.
Yeah, and
they also finish off the year at Stillwater.
Yeah, and 2 games we got 2 games tonight even that could help, provide a little insight as to just how good a couple of these teams are, because Greenville plays a non-conference game at home tonight against Guilderland. And then I had the other one right in front of me. Oh, Maple Hill is hosting Catskill.
Yep.
So, pair of games right there that just tonight could help clarify the picture of just how good these squads really are. I know Guilderland's I know they're AAA and all that, but I feel like talent-wise, despite the difference in classification, I feel like talent level-wise, it's not that big of a difference between Guilderland and Greenville right now. So it'll be intriguing to see what happens there.
Go find the smoke.
Exactly. Class A, we've already discussed it a decent amount with Holy Names of Albany Academy. We briefly mentioned Shelmont with their win over BKW. And then Brawl and Perth, man, they are who we thought they were. As Dennis Green said years ago about the Chicago Bears in that famous Monday Night Football postgame press conference. Sorry, I went nerdy there for a second. But, we got, Glens Falls, they're in the middle of things a little bit in the foothills. Scotia Glenville, who, to me, that's a little bit of a shocker, seeing them, holding serve at about 500 right now. But all in all, obviously the attention, and rightfully so, in certain regards, is mainly on BP, Holy Names, Academy, and Shalmon right now.
Yeah, they are who we thought they were. Just in general.
Yeah.
Things play out as we envision them playing out so far. Broad Albin's kind of in that same. It is what it is. They're at a different level than the vast majority of the foothills, so they're kind of in that similar boat right now as far as they've got some sleepers. They've played several games already that are competing against yourself a little bit. You're just thinking about trying to get the most out of yourself each game because that you can dog it and still win compared to who you're playing against. So you have to try and get the most out of yourself on a night-to-night basis. I was not at the Downtown Classic in Utica over the break because I was at Amsterdam and Elmira for the Josh Palmer and April Park and Cooperstown and Holy Names. But so I don't know for sure, but part of me wonders a little bit because the one game that brought Albin outside of the Queensberry game at the beginning of the year, the one game that was really one that kind of hung in the balance for them in the second half was there when they played New Hartford. And New Hartford, non-Section 2, right? Section 3. New Hartford's got a nice team. They're a team of the future out there. Young guard play, energetic, skilled, scrappy, competitive, all that stuff. Young, freshmen, 8th grade, sophomores, that sort of age range. Broad Albin ended up winning the game, I think, by 14, but they needed a plus 21 second half to do it. I think they were down 7 at the break and then just swallowed them up in the second half. New Hartford's small. I wonder if, without watching it, I wonder if part of that was you play 2 or 3 weeks and generally speaking, like 35 to 50-point games, then you have to play somebody that New Hartford's pretty good. That's a not bad team. So, that's a situation that BP is going through where you have to just kind of get the most out of yourself. And realistically, I'm looking at their schedule right now. They have a couple weeks where they kind of, like you said, they play at Scotia next Monday, which, yeah, they should swallow them up. But Scotia's had a little success too. But I look at 2 weeks more probably of that before big game 2 weeks from Thursday at Queensberry. But yeah, they're in that sort of boat where they're just kind of at a different level than they're required to play. What the Foothills have them playing this year? 16 games. I'm counting that up right now. Probably not the best time to do it, but I'm doing it. 12, 13, 14,
16. You're right.
So, yeah, you're required to play 16 games in, with your Foothills schedule. And they get legitimately tested, probably in any way, shape, or form, probably a handful of them. Like Queensberry's a real test twice. They're on a different level than Glens Falls, but Glens Falls has physical, scrappy, competitive athletes, so they can kind of test them in a different way. And playing at Amsterdam is always, that it's always kind of a different environment, and it's a local rivalry. Like playing at Amsterdam, I feel like is always a test for everybody.
Listen, before that, now, for whatever reason, I don't have the final score from the game at Gloversville last night for them. And I don't want to assume, so I'm going to double check and see.
I thought I saw
Oh,
it.
never mind. I see it now. Okay. I'm not even going to read that score. That's, yeah, wow. But if you take away that New Hartford game, actually, no, include the New Hartford game. So 9 games now, including last night's win at Gloversville. Nine games for BP, 9-0. The Queensbury game, which I rule as an anomaly because they only scored 38 points and still won that game. That's the only game that's had a final deficit of less than 13.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, and you mentioned New Hartford, they were down at the half by 7 or 8, and then they had to win the second half by 20 to win that game. But the challenges have not been there very frequently for this team. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with them, come sectional time, because this is not me trying to put down BP at all. They got a lot of skilled players. Coach Russum is doing a great job with them. And it's an older squad that's hungry to, avenge what they, was a very tough semifinal loss last year to Holy Names. But it will be interesting if they, when they get down to the nitty gritty, and let's hypothetically say they do get back to the sectional semis, they'll probably draw a Shalmont or Holy Names. Shalmont, kind of like a mirror image of Glens Falls in a way with the way their roster is constructed. Holy Names, Maggie Volmer can at least provide, a response to the height and length of BP with her presence inside. So things will get intriguing. Obviously the Queensbury game and maybe 1 or 2 other games in the regular season, but matchups are going to be everything, I feel like, once they get towards the middle to end of February.
Yeah, I look player for player, they're fine. Just thinking about what their roster is, who their players are. Just in general, player for player, they're fine. I don't worry about them. But I do tend to worry about teams when you have one that's very battle tested over the course of 2 or 3 months, that's used to playing at speed A, because their opponents that they play against for the most part are speed A. And the other team, not nearly as battle tested, and they've had to try to do everything that they can, go out of their way, push themselves and force themselves to be at speed A because the opponent's not forcing them to be that.
Right.
So I'd always tend to worry about those teams. But player for player, they're fine.
Understood.
But yeah, I always worry about battle tested versus not as battle tested. Absolutely.
All right, taking a peek at Double A now. Queensbury, they were able to return the favor to Amsterdam and split the home and home with them for the season with a nice victory over the Rams. All in all, though, relatively speaking, a quiet, last 5 days for Double A before things really start ramping up again tonight with conference play and just play in general for everyone. Right now, the landscape is Columbia at the top with what was a really front-loaded schedule for them. They're 10-1 right now. Nobody else in Double A right now has played more than 9 games aside from them. Averill Park. Then we got obviously Catholic Central. In the midst of everything, they've played a very wide variety in their schedule thus far, between playing Section 2 teams and teams in the Colonial Council. Plus, they've made, I think, 2 trips downstate for various events and taken on some New York City, Long Island teams to boost their non-league schedule and get a little different look as far as that's concerned. So That's the way things are looking right now in Double A. Any school particular that you have your eye on going forward the next couple weeks to see where they end up?
I'll start off since you brought up Queensberry Amsterdam from Monday night. My little takeaway from that is I had a friend at the game. I'll out him, Nate Butel, the Niagara Community College. Sorry, SUNY Niagara, the head coach at SUNY Niagara. They rebranded. But he was at the game and he sent me the final score. And my response was, big Shea game, or were the other kids able to produce against Amsterdam because of how small they are? And he gave me the answer that is the worst possible answer for anybody to ever play against Queensberry. Both. Shea played well and the others produced. Like, all right, so if we're starting to hit, that hasn't really been the case. That's why their numbers, that's why Queensberry has been scoring in the 30s and 40s. This happened to be a game Amsterdam wants to play with pace, and Queensberry can do that, so the score is probably going to be a little bit higher. But if that was 66-49 or something, 66 to upper 40s, 47, 49.
47, yep.
66-47. If we get to a point where that's not the only time that's said, I think Shea had 29. But if with Coach Butel's answer being both, it was a Shea game and it was an everyone else game. If we get to that on any sort of a halfway consistent basis, then you can start talking about Queensberry kind of in that fold with, I would, like Bethlehem and Niski, right? I think that in whatever particular order you would like to list them, I think that AP Catholic High Columbia have separated themselves a little bit. But if Queensberry is starting to hit their own little stride, then I think you start talking about them more in that like next tier with the Bethlehems and Niskayuna. But yeah, it was pretty quiet week. There's not that much to talk about just as far as like recent happenings. Schedule picks up for some and it dies off for others. Like you said, with Columbia playing a pretty front-loaded schedule, which front-loaded schedules I feel like are a little more uncommon with the large schools. Large schools kind of backload a little bit. But now they've seen where they're at. I think they finished the week with a good test. I think they play Shen on Friday. So that'll be a good challenge for them. But they it's just your top teams just handling business. That's a good double-A week for Shen too, who we'll probably talk about in a minute in some way, shape, or form. But that means that's a week where they play Columbia and AP because they have Averill Park tonight.
Yeah. Before we dive too deep in the schedule, just look at AAA quick. Gildan, they were able to get a win over LaSalle during the week. Albany, they swept a pair of games over the weekend against Newburgh Free Academy and Binghamton. I know Albany's not a team we talked about a whole lot because kind of like Catholic Central, they've had a funky schedule too where their non-league games have been against teams that are not normally discussed for coming in from out of town for non-league games. But, I feel like Albany has quietly been putting together a good resume before league play really ramps up these next 6 weeks for the Lady Falcons. And in a way, maybe if there is such a thing in a 7 or 8 team classification, Albany is kind of flying under the radar so far. I mean,
100%. 100%.
Because obviously a lot of the attention is going to Shaker, Shen, Colony, But Albany is putting in the work and getting, and I'll take part of the fault here because it's on me too in a way. They're getting like zero love for the work they have been putting in just because of the structure of their non-league part of the schedule these first 6 weeks of the season. So I'm really interested in seeing what we do see out of Albany moving forward, because we're talking about a week here where we mentioned the Holy Names game coming up on Thursday. Then they're hosting another non-league game against Mount Vernon Saturday, and then they'll really jump into again a really, like, they'll play 2 suburban games with like a 10-day break between those 2 games. Then they're gonna play 3 games in the suburban council with 10-day break between 2 of those games. Then they're going to be going to Poughkeepsie at the end of January, a day before they host Columbia on the 31st. So, like, and then they go to play St. Mary's and Manhasset on February. Like, it's a very, very weird, complex schedule put together by Decky Lawson. But hey, man, they're getting the job done, and it's time that they get a little bit of love from somebody.
Yeah, I'll go a few different directions with this without trying to ramble. Decky probably has mixed feelings about this because on one hand, I know that Albany High wants the love. I've heard it. I've been in those conversations. I've been in those rooms of, how come no one's showing us love? Oh, especially when they were up at the top of the section 2-3 years ago. I lived my first 5 years in this area. I lived on Western and Quail. I lived 3 blocks away from Albany High School. They said I wasn't around enough. So like I know that they want the love. I know that they want the press, the attention. Like, give us what you're giving them. But at the same time, he probably isn't unhappy with flying under the radar. Go ahead, pay attention to everyone else while we get right. While we get everybody around Azira Gates, where they have Jasani Francis Torres, who's a transfer from Kingston High School. They're trying to get, just make these pieces fit. Nyana Austin, who I was at the game last year where she hurt her knee and was out for the rest of the year. They're kind of, getting her back to 100%. So he's probably thinking, yeah, go ahead. Go talk about everyone else. Go watch everyone else. Let us do what we do. Come see us late in the year. So I go both ways with it. I'm guessing he might go both ways with it a little bit too. They're still looking for, to me, when you look at their schedule, is what they haven't had yet is a signature win. There's wins and then there's signature wins. There's ones that you hang your hat on, like, no, we're the real deal. They did beat Bethlehem early in the year, 1-point game, but couple tests, a couple games that I look at that were like real tests, like for AAA. Shaker, they were there for a while, and then Shaker ran away later in the game. Ended up being a 20-point game. That's what Shaker does. You've seen Shaker do that. I saw him do it against Averill Park. We both saw him do it against Webster Schrader. I guess they didn't run away, but I guess they kind of did the truncated version of that with Academy in the last 5 or 6 minutes of that game. So that's kind of what Shaker does. Kennedy Catholic, sounds like that was a big fourth quarter, neutral site, but it was in Albany, right? Holy Names with Kennedy Catholic coming up from Somers. Talented group, also in their own right, trying to make all the pieces mesh, make all the pieces fit. They had a lot of kids come in via transfer. So that looked like it was a big fourth quarter by Kennedy Catholic to win by 8. So, they're still looking for that signature win. They beat Newburgh. It's not a signature win. Newburgh's got a nice guard and TT Burden, but it's not like a signature win. Although I could be wrong on this, but I looked at the box and I don't think Azira Gates was in that box. So they may have went without AZ that game. That is just speculation because I did not watch it. But I know that she was not in that box. So if that's a win without AZ, it's a good win. I am a little impressed with the fact that when I looked at the box for the Binghamton game, we saw Binghamton at the Amsterdam showcase. They beat up on Binghamton and they were up like 21-2 at the end of the first quarter. So their ability to jump on them to me was impressive. And yeah, looking ahead at their future schedule, like, circle next Tuesday at Colony. That's we really get to find out about them. Their non-league varies. Like, Kennedy Catholic, really nice team. White Plains, no. White Plains very, very down. They were very good a couple years ago. They're very down now. Poughkeepsie has a really nice young player, Mahogany Felix, that plays Albany area AAU with Will Harris and Team Takeoff. But as a team, they're rebuilding. They play St. Mary's Manhasset. St. Mary's is very good. So that's not only is it a non-league schedule that's non-traditional for a Section 2 team, which is something that they tend to do, it's also a very like peaks and valleys sort of level. So looking forward to seeing them. It's been a minute since they've played against a strong local opponent. So looking forward to seeing how that shakes out in coming weeks. But yeah, they're definitely a dark horse because they are getting next to no attention, but maybe that might be something that they're okay with as they get those pieces to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
And I gotta give out love the one specific player because I've always respected the hustle that she puts out there the last few years when I've seen her. I gotta give a little love to Mia Corazzini because she's put in the work the last few years. She may not have been like there might have been a lot of other pieces the last couple of years that got a lot more hype than her. Aside from Azira, there are a couple other players that have come through and are going on to play on the next level right now. But Mia, she's shown growth and development. So you keep doing, Mia. You got it.
She accepts her role and does everything that she can to excel in that role.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And you need that energy kid. You need that athlete. You need that grinded out kid. I know she's always seemed like kind of a team favorite, fan favorite sort of thing. Like if Mia's playing well, then that crowd, especially as they get later in the season, the crowd gets a little bit bigger, a little bit more juiced.
Yeah,
Mia plays well, like that crowd's gonna give her some real love.
Absolutely. Just in general, getting a look at a general overview of the schedule for the week. A couple teams that pop out with some big games this week. You mentioned Shen briefly with them playing at AP tonight and then at Columbia Friday. Also, I'd say Colony has a pair of very intriguing games. They're hosting Bethlehem tonight. Then they go to Niskayuna on Friday. Boston Spa, a team that, this week is going to be the real week to see just how legit Boston Spa is because they're going to be at Shaker tonight. Then they host Bethlehem Friday. And then I'll just put it out there. Northville. They get OESJ tomorrow night and then BKW Friday. Yes, they're both home games, but OESJ is right there at the top of Class C right now. BKW, same thing, top of Class C. Both in conference games in the WAC. So, I mean, if Northville is going to try and separate themselves any more at the top of Class D right now, this is definitely a pair of games that will help them do that, taking on two of their top challengers in conference.
Yeah, out of any team in Section 2, the team that I look at and say that, if we're gonna say like big week or important or whatever, I think that this is a bigger week for Northville than it is anybody else, because Northville's also in that boat where, they got a lot of blowouts on that resume. And a lot of teams, they played a lot of teams. Cobble still got them. When they played,
First week of December,
they played Corinth. That was, I think, it ended up being a 20-point game, but that was a little bit better of an opponent. But they've played a lot of teams that they can press to death and turn their guards over. And it's a little bit, this week is a little bit different where you play OESJ, where I think it's a question as to whether OESJ's guards can handle that pressure. But it's not Northville's just going to press them to death and turn them. It's not like a guarantee that Northville can just turn them over 35 times and run away with a win. So that's more of a question sort of game. And then there's the Burn game, which that's another question as far as can Northville really cause problems pressuring Burn. But also, that's the sort of team that's going to press, like Burn will press Northville back. So Northville has guard play. They have Haley Monroe. Haley's usually not the sort of kid to, have issues with the press. But sometimes teams that apply that kind of ball pressure and give opponents fits in that regard, a lot of times they have issues getting it back, when a team fights fire with fire. So this is just, and it's also just kind of the intermingling of the top three teams in the WAC.
And I'll say this real quick about the Friday game. I feel like it's not often I'll say this. It's also, I think it's also going to be determined partially on the sideline. Coach Zulo, Coach Galvin, I mean,
there's a lot of wins.
Two of the finest minds in Section 2 hoops. We all know Coach Zulo's resume. Coach Galvin, always in the mix of things, it feels like, year in and year out. And I think I feel like Coach Galvin just had, what was it, 400? I think he just reached.
He's
300, something like that.
He's
so
probably 400 and change.
Yeah,
I would say.
So I think he just reached that. It was like end of last year, I want to say. So I mean, I feel like that this is, we can break down the matchups all we want for BKW and Northville, but I also feel like this is partially about a head coaching matchup too, because Tom's not going to be intimidated by Zulo and vice versa. Zulo definitely not going to be intimidated by Galvin just because of everything Coach Zulo has done in his career. So very, very intrigued by that matchup Friday night.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of wins, a lot of success between those two coaches. But yeah, like I look at that, and yes, so that game's Friday night, and yes, if you're looking at level of play, quality of play, the game of the night is Shanat Columbia that night. But overall, and this is part me being, not poo-pooing the small schools. Like I look at Burn Northville, I very well may end up at Burn Northville.
Listen,
know
if I wasn't announcing at RPI Friday night, I mean, I'm in Amsterdam. It's a little easier trip for me. I probably would have made the trip myself. So
yeah,
I hear you on that.
I'm not going to be at Shen Columbia because I'm probably going to be at Shen AP tonight. I'm looking at, Friday night. I'm looking at either Burn Northville or Section 4 for another Class D game, South Court Right and Stanford Jefferson,
Yeah.
which should be those are two of the best teams in the state in Class D, and they are like 4 miles away from each other, and they are just lifelong rivals
Yep.
because their parents were, because their grandparents were, because their great grandparents were. So, but yeah, big week for Northville. Home games, sure, they get to play in the confines of their own gym, but OESJ and Burn, two different looking teams, two reasonable tests for them. Shen, AP, Columbia, and I think they're on the road for both of them.
Yes, they are.
So that's a that's a good test of a week for Shen. I know we've mentioned Catskill Maple Hill tonight. You mentioned Bethlehem Colony. Thursday, we've got Albany at Holy Names. I mentioned that I was probably going to be there's a good chance that I pop in for that one. So I get a first look at Albany High. And up north, you have Glens Falls plays at Queensbury on Thursday night as well. So
I'll throw another one at you for Thursday night, by the way, not to completely throw you off. Tamarack at Saratoga Catholic.
okay.
Just because that kind of gives me it kind of gives me a little bit of the same feel of what happened of last night with Tamarack Hoosick Valley. Except I think Spot Catholic has, as far as top tier talent on the team, I think it's a little higher it's a little higher than what Hoosick Valley offered with Whitbeck and Ryan. So that could play as a difficult matchup, even though Spot Catholic's Class D, I know that. But I think they could still offer a difficult matchup for Caleb Bedoin and the rest of the team at Tamarack.
Yeah, and these are the sorts of games that make Spot Catholic interesting in 6 weeks in Class D, because as we're talking about, this big test for Northville playing OESJ and Burn, and talk about this barometer for Hartford, who Hartford did beat Spot Catholic early in the season, but it was just put that out on Front Street. But they did beat Spot Catholic at the beginning of the year. But this test for Hartford, they're playing Warrensburg. Spot Catholic's playing Tamarack Stillwater. The Spot Catholic played Stillwater Monday, Tamarack Thursday. Mechanicville's on their schedule. Greenwich is on their schedule. They're playing a different speed. So that's the sort of thing that makes them interesting down the road.
Yeah.
I think, and Stillwater, the final score with the Stillwater game was an 18-point game. I think it was 66-48.
Yeah.
It was not quite as close as that score indicates. I think the second Stillwater got up about 20 at the half, and they were up like mid-20s after 3, and maybe they call off the dogs or whatever. Although they did have balance across the board. I'm now looking at that box, and it looks like Stillwater's starting 5 pretty much scored all their points. So they maybe called off the dogs to a certain extent, but not like entirely. But yeah, like that was the thing about Spot Catholic is I feel like they play a team like that, or they play a team like Tamarack or whoever last year, and those games were like 70-20. They were runaway sorts of games, and now they're at a stage like they're not winning those games, and you don't feel like they have a real. In all due respect to them, you don't feel like they have a real chance to win those games, but they're not getting fully outclassed by that sort of opponent. So strides, gradual steps forward.
Real quick to wrap up. You mentioned Shen AP tonight. Possibly going to step in for Albany Holy Names Thursday night. Any other games locked in for your schedule the next 5 to 6 days?
This week I've narrowed every day down to 2 options, and I've just been indecisive about making the final call on stuff. Like Shen AP is winning out over CNS Liverpool tonight which that that is a rivalry of all rivalries. That one's winning out tonight because I will be sitting here waiting for my new camera body to come in the mail, hoping that UPS delivers it before I have to leave to go to Averill Park. So that made my decision pretty easy for me. I'm not fully decided on tomorrow. Might end up hitting the road, going to Section 4. But not fully, mine's not fully made up. Thursday, I'm leaning towards that doubleheader that, believed to be at Holy Names with Maple Hill Schenectady and Albany Holy Names. Friday, I'm 50-50 on Bern Northville versus SK Stamford. Saturday, I'm going out to Syracuse, hitting a couple games out there. I think they've got it's kind of a late Saturday, and they have a city school showcase sort of. I think it's Syracuse West plays Onondaga High School and Henniger Nottingham, which is turning into a nice Syracuse City rivalry. I think there's a little, I won't call it full out bad blood, but they have a little, some not good blood boiling between those two. And I'll hit Casanova at VVS on the way back with, timing working out. And then Sunday, with that recently scheduled Sunday morning, as long as that was scheduled correctly or listed correctly on Schedule Galaxy, with Voorheesville and Maple Hill as a brunch club, 11 a.m. If that is listed correctly and those two are actually playing at 11 a.m. on Sunday, I'm there. Count me in. Another one on Sunday that's kind of interesting. That's a non-Section 2, but I'm thinking about going out there. Section 3, AAA versus C. Bishop Ludden plays Hamilton at Colgate. They're playing at, I forget if they've renamed that court. I've always thought of it as Cotterell. Colgate was my local, Central New York, Syracuse is what we all consider our local D1, but geographically Colgate was my local D1 growing up. But they played each other last year. I think Hamilton made the trip to Syracuse, and Ludden's returning the favor. Kind of an interesting guard matchup. Should actually be a pretty competitive game. It's a 5 o'clock Sunday on the campus of Colgate University, Ludden and Hamilton. So I'm thinking about jetting out to Hamilton after that game in Voorheesville, but I'll have to get that approved at home.
Colgate Red Raiders, I think, still, right?
Raiders, yeah. Or Raiders, Red Raiders, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hamilton High School is the Emerald Knights.
Oh, I like that. I like that one.
Little red green. You got the battle. You got the battle of the Knights because Ludden and Hamilton both green, and Hamilton's the Emerald Knights and Ludden's the Gaelic Knights.
I like that. That's pretty. I like that. That's good. That'll be interesting. That'll be real interesting.
Not Section 2, but that's my rant about Central New York night team names.
You're all good, man. You're all good. Jeff Mlinar, Empire State Takeover, EmpireStateTakeover.com. Don't forget it. Especially if you want his updated upstate 20 rankings for all 6 classifications week to week, pretty much throughout the rest of the season. Jeff, safe travels, and we'll do this again next week. All right, man?
Yes, sir. Thank you.